Fire. When you think of the United States, who's the first person that comes to mind? For many, it's the face on the $1 bill, the man whose monument pierces the sky in the nation's capital, George Washington. But who was he, really? Beyond the myths and the portraits, who was the man who led a revolution and shaped a nation? Let's peel back the layers of history and get to know the real George Washington. Born in 1732 in colonial Virginia, George wasn't born into the highest echelons of society, but his family was well off. They were landowners and slaveholders, part of the Virginia gentry. Young George didn't have a fancy European education like some of his contemporaries. Instead, he learned practical skills. He became a surveyor, which in the 18th century was like being an explorer and a real estate developer, all in one. He learned the land, trekking through the wilderness, a mere tenor. And this intimate knowledge of the American terrain would become incredibly valuable later in his life. His early military career was, let's just say, a bit of a mixed bag. As a young officer in the Virginia militia during the French and Indian War, he was ambitious and eager for glory. He was at the center of the conflict's very beginning, involved in a skirmish that arguably sparked the global war. He experienced both humiliating defeats and hard-won lessons. He learned about military strategy, the importance of discipline, and how to lead men in incredibly difficult conditions. These early struggles forged the resilience and strategic mind that would later define him. After the war, Washington returned to Virginia. He married a wealthy widow, Martha Dandridge Custis, and became a successful planter at his beloved estate, Mount Vernon. For about 15 years, he lived the life of a country gentleman, managing his farms, experimenting with new agricultural techniques, and serving in the Virginia House of Burgesses. He was a respected figure, but not yet a revolutionary. He was a loyal British subject, but, like many colonists, he grew increasingly frustrated with British policies. The taxes, the lack of representation, the feeling that they were being treated like second-class citizens, it all started to simmer. When tensions finally boiled over into open conflict at Lexington and Concord, the colonies needed a leader. The coups possibly unite 13 disparate colonies against the most powerful military force on Earth. They turned to Washington. Why him? He had military experience. He was a Virginian, which helped bridge the gap between the northern and southern colonies, and he had a commanding presence. When he showed up to the Second Continental Congress in his full military uniform, he was making a statement. I am ready to lead. In June 1775, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Now, leading the Continental Army was an almost impossible job. The army was a ragtag collection of farmers, merchants, and volunteers. They were poorly trained, poorly equipped, and constantly short on supplies. They were up against the British Redcoats, the most professional army in the world. Washington's genius wasn't necessarily in winning every battle. In fact, he lost more battles than he won. His true genius was in keeping the army together. He was the glue. Think about the brutal winter at Valley Forge. His soldiers were starving, freezing, and riddled with disease. Many wanted to quit, but Washington stayed with his men, sharing their hardship, pleading with Congress for supplies, and maintaining a flicker of hope. He was a master of strategic retreat, knowing when to fight and when to fall back to preserve his army for another day. His surprise attack on Trenton after famously crossing the icy Delaware River was a masterstroke. It was a huge morale boost when the Revolution desperately needed one. It showed that the Americans could win, that Washington was a leader who could deliver victory against all odds. For 8 long years, Washington held the revolution together through sheer force of will. His leadership inspired loyalty in his men and confidence in the American cause across the world. When the British finally surrendered at Yorktown in 1781, it was a moment of triumph. Not just for the American cause, but for Washington personally. His long, arduous struggle was over. Here's where Washington does something truly remarkable. something that stunned the world. He had an army at his back and the adoration of a new nation. He could have become a king, a dictator, a military ruler. Many expected him to. Instead, he did the opposite. He went before Congress and resigned his commission, handing power back to the people. This act was revolutionary. It established the principle of civilian control over the military, a cornerstone of American democracy. He simply wanted to go home to Mount Vernon, to his farm and his family. But the country wasn't done with him yet. The new nation, under the Articles of Confederation, was floundering. It was weak and disorganized. So, the leaders came together again to write a new constitution. And who did they choose to preside over the Constitutional Convention? George Washington. His presence lent the proceedings an air of gravity and legitimacy. His quiet, steady leadership helped guide the delegates through contentious debates to forge a new, stronger government. Once the Constitution was ratified, there was only one choice for the first President of the United States. Washington was unanimously elected, not once, but twice. He was reluctant. He loved his private life, but he felt a sense of duty. As the first president, he knew that everything he did would set a precedent for the future. He wasn't just leading a country, he was inventing the presidency. He established the first cabinet, creating a team of advisors like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. He navigated the fierce political battles between these two brilliant but opposing minds. He asserted the power of the federal government, putting down the Whiskey Rebellion to show that the new nation's laws would be enforced. In foreign policy, he steered a careful course of neutrality, keeping the young, fragile nation out of the wars raging in Europe. After 2 terms, Washington again did something extraordinary. He voluntarily stepped down. In his farewell address, he offered his final words of wisdom to the American people. He warned against the dangers of political factions and urged the country to avoid getting entangled in foreign conflicts. He set the standard for a peaceful transfer of power, another bedrock of American democracy. He finally returned to Mount Vernon, where he spent the last few years of his life. But his legacy was secure. He wasn't a perfect man. Who's a man of his time, and that means we have to confront the difficult fact that he was a lifelong slaveholder. This is a complex and painful part of his story that we can't ignore. He struggled with the institution of slavery, and in his will, he made the monumental decision to free the enslaved people he owned. It was a final act that, while not absolving him, showed a capacity for growth and a recognition of the hypocrisy at the heart of the new nation's founding. So, who was George Washington? He was a surveyor who knew the land, a soldier who learned from defeat, a general who held a revolution together with sheer grit. He was a leader who twice gave up power when he could have kept it, a president who built the foundations of the office, and a founder who, for all his flaws, dedicated his life to the creation of the United States. He's more than just a face on a dollar bill. He's the indispensable man who made America possible. Thanks for watching. Cheers. If you found this interesting, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. See you next time.